A gamble that unfolded not over weeks of planning that leaked to intelligence services, not over days of gradual positioning, but in 48 hours. 48 hours that rewrote the front lines, 48 hours that collapsed assumptions held by generals on both sides. 48 hours that proved war never follows the script either side expects. What the attacking force did crossed a line that defensive command had calculated would hold for months. And when that line broke, the defenders did not hesitate. They responded with fury, precision, and a counteroffensive that nobody, not even their own allies, saw coming. This is the deep analysis of the gamble nobody expected. For several weeks now, there had been signals, not official communiques, not diplomatic warnings, just signals, that one side was preparing something unprecedented. The attacking force had been aggressive, yes, but they had been predictable in their aggression. Their moves had followed a certain rhythm, a tempo, almost a doctrine that intelligence analysts had studied for months. But what set off alarm bells in command bunkers this week was that the rhythm went silent. Military observers who monitor troop movements, supply chain activity, and communications patterns know the indicators: the buildup of reserve forces near secondary positions, the unusual rotation of experienced units away from the main front, the stockpiling of ammunition at locations that didn't match current operational zones, the sudden reduction in electronic communications. All of that went quiet. And whenever an aggressive military force goes quiet, it means something is about to get loud. Officers who have studied military history understand this pattern. The silence before major offensives is not accidental. It's doctrinal. It's designed to create maximum confusion in the enemy's intelligence picture, to make them second-guess their assessments, to force them into a defensive crouch precisely when they should be reinforcing. What neither army fully appreciated was that this silence was masking something far more ambitious than a localized push. It was masking a complete strategic pivot. Early Tuesday morning, forward observation units detected what they described as unprecedented movement across multiple sectors, including the activation of reserve formations that had not been committed to combat in over 14 months. These are the kinds of forces that military planners only deploy when they are signaling something very specific: a major breakthrough attempt, a strategic diversion, or a final desperate gamble. Intelligence officers didn't know which category this fell into, or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know was that the attacking force was changing its entire operational posture. And when a military force shifts posture without explanation, even by small measures, every command center pays attention. What made this particular movement alarming was the direction. This wasn't a reinforcement of existing positions. This wasn't a rotation of tired units. This was a complete reorientation toward a sector that had been considered strategically dormant for nearly 6 months, a sector where defensive lines were thin, a sector where supply routes were exposed, a sector where the gamble, if it succeeded, could split the defensive front in two. Within hours, what had been dismissed as repositioning became unmistakably clear. This was the opening move of something far larger. The warning issued by defensive command that night was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. Officer after officer, emerging from emergency briefings, described the enemy's move as reckless, unprecedented, and, perhaps most importantly, potentially catastrophic if not contained within the first 24 hours. But military gambles only work if the target hesitates. The defenders did not. In fact, their response over the following 12 hours was among the most aggressive and coordinated we've seen in this entire conflict. Here's what we know. Within 6 hours of detecting the offensive, defensive command authorized full mobilization of strategic reserves that had been held back for exactly this scenario. These weren't the standard reinforcements trickling to the front. These were elite rapid response units, formations that defensive command only deploys when they are preparing to counterattack, not merely absorb. Armored columns that had been positioned near rear logistics hubs began moving forward at speeds that surprised even Allied observers. Artillery batteries that had been conserving ammunition for weeks suddenly opened coordinated fire missions across the entire threatened sector. The message was clear. The defenders were not going to wait for the offensive to reach them. They were going to meet it head-on. By Wednesday evening, military sources confirmed that defensive forces had launched counterstrikes on multiple enemy positions. including forward command posts that had recently been activated for what analysts believe was the coordination of the breakthrough attempt. Defensive forces struck before the attackers could consolidate their initial gains. They hit supply convoys moving ammunition forward. They hit engineering units preparing to breach obstacles. They hit communication nodes that were likely coordinating the movement of follow-on forces. In other words, the defenders targeted the nervous system of the offensive, the logistics that would have sustained it, the communications that would have coordinated it, the leadership that would have directed it. This is what made the defensive response so decisive. The attacking force's gamble wasn't just ambitious, it was dependent on speed. It represented the kind of operation that could collapse the entire front if left unchecked for even 48 hours. And the defenders, understanding that fully, responded with force. Not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. They didn't scatter their response across the entire line. They didn't waste reserves on secondary diversions. They hit the main axis of advance. They hit the support infrastructure making that advance possible. Military analysts studying the response have noted something remarkable. The defenders appeared to have anticipated not just the direction of the attack, but the timetable. Their reserves were positioned not where the enemy was, but where the enemy was going to be in 12 hours. That level of anticipation doesn't happen by accident. It happens through intelligence penetration. It happens through superior reconnaissance. And it happens through commanders who trust their assessments enough to act on them. And here's where the story becomes even more significant. Military analysts now believe that the attacking force's gamble was designed to test the resilience of defensive coordination after months of attritional warfare. The attackers wanted to see whether the defenders would fragment under sudden pressure, whether command structures would hesitate, whether reserves would arrive too late, whether the political will to counterattack had eroded. But instead, the opposite happened. The defenders didn't fragment. They mounted a response that was so rapid, so coordinated, that even the attacking force's own commanders noticed. You don't get an aggressive military's attention easily. But in those 48 hours, the defenders did. Senior officers speaking with military correspondents under anonymity described the attacking force's gamble as a probing offensive, a way to test vulnerabilities while maintaining deniability about larger strategic intentions. But the defenders proved that they remained both capable and committed. Their counterstrikes were not only fast, they were calibrated so precisely that they achieved effects far beyond their numerical strength. That calibration matters because it shows something crucial about the state of the defending force. It shows that they are not simply absorbing punishment. They are actively shaping the battlefield. They are denying the initiative. And in modern warfare, denying the initiative is often more important than any territorial gain. As reports continued coming in throughout Thursday, we learned more about the scale of the defensive response. Armored formations carried out flanking maneuvers that forced attacking units to halt their advance and reorient. Artillery targeted supply staging areas that had been established in the last 72 hours specifically for this offensive. Special operations units operating behind enemy lines reportedly destroyed communication infrastructure used by the attackers to coordinate their advance. Drone units achieved unprecedented sortie rates, maintaining constant surveillance and strike capability across the entire threatened sector. This wasn't just defense. This wasn't just counterattack. This was operational counterpunch. This was strategic denial. And strategic denial is the one thing the attacking force has struggled to overcome since this conflict began. For every advance they have made, the defenders have countered with something that complicates their consolidation. For every breakthrough they have achieved, the defenders have found ways to isolate and contain it. And now, for this gamble, the biggest gamble in months, the defenders have responded with a demonstration of capability that will force complete reassessment in enemy command structures. Remember, the attacking force thought this offensive would catch defenders off balance. They thought months of grinding attrition had depleted defensive reserves. They thought the element of surprise would compensate for any deficiencies in their own planning. They thought political pressure on the defending government would slow response times. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. Defensive reserves proved deeper than estimated. Coordination proved faster than expected. Political will proved stronger than assumed. Every assumption that underpinned this gamble has been challenged by the reality of the response. This doesn't mean the attacking force has failed entirely. The situation remains fluid and dangerous. But it does mean that the easy victory they gambled on is no longer available. What makes this moment so dangerous and so consequential, is that the attacking forces gamble happened at a time when their own leadership is under enormous internal pressure. Hardliners want escalation, pragmatists want negotiated settlement, military commanders want more resources, economic advisors want reduced spending. Leadership is balancing these demands while prosecuting a campaign that has lasted far longer and cost far more than originally projected. And when leaders in that position make sudden aggressive moves, they're not doing it from strength, they're doing it from pressure. They're doing it from vulnerability. They're doing it because internal dynamics demand visible progress, any progress, regardless of strategic wisdom. Understanding this context is essential for interpreting what happens next. If the gamble had succeeded, it would have bought leadership political breathing room. Now that the gamble is being contested, now that the defenders have responded with unexpected force, leadership faces an uncomfortable choice: escalate further and risk even greater losses, or accept that this offensive has stalled and deal with the internal consequences. Neither option is attractive. The defensive government's statement, now distributed through military and diplomatic channels worldwide, was designed to signal that they are not willing to allow any territorial collapse. Officials said plainly that the attacking forces' offensive was inconsistent with any pathway toward resolution. That is diplomatic language for, this proves they're not interested in peace and they're interested in conquest. You don't usually hear that tone from governments under pressure unless something serious is at stake. The statement went further, explicitly thanking allied nations for their support and calling for accelerated delivery of military assistance. This is significant. It suggests the defending government views this moment not as a crisis to be endured, but as an opportunity to demonstrate exactly why continued support is necessary. Meanwhile, the defending nation's leader addressed their armed forces in a measured but defiant speech Thursday evening. He said, "They believed we were exhausted. They were wrong." He said, "They believed our resolve had weakened. It has only grown stronger." And he said, "Every meter they attempt to take will cost them 10 times what they are willing to pay." These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from a leadership that understands just how high the stakes have become. The speech was broadcast not only domestically but internationally, a clear signal that the defending nation wants the world to see its response, to understand its capabilities, and to recognize its determination. Here's what makes the situation even more concerning. The attacking forces' gamble wasn't isolated. Along with the main offensive, secondary forces also launched diversionary attacks on 2 additional sectors. Naval units increased activity in adjacent maritime zones, cyber operations intensified targeting critical infrastructure and communication networks, propaganda operations accelerated, attempting to shape international perception of the offensive. All of this happened within the same 48-hour window. When an aggressive military moves multiple pieces at once, it means something larger is underway. It means this wasn't improvised. It was coordinated, it was planned, and it was meant to overwhelm defensive response capacity. The fact that defenders responded effectively across all these vectors simultaneously is perhaps the most remarkable element of this story. Military analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that the attacking force is preparing to commit additional reserves to salvage the offensive. Another is that the attacking force is attempting to use this moment to negotiate from a position of apparent strength before the failure becomes undeniable. A third possibility, the one worrying analysts the most, is that the attacking force is preparing to escalate using capabilities they have held in reserve. But today, the defenders took several of those options off the table. They didn't wait for the offensive to culminate. They didn't respond proportionally. They didn't give the attackers time to consolidate. They counterattacked with everything available. And in doing so, they may have changed the trajectory of this entire conflict. What we're watching now is a test of resolve. The attacking force wants to see if defenders will sustain this level of response. The defenders want to show that they can maintain pressure indefinitely. Allied nations want to prevent any appearance of defensive collapse. And the international community wants to prevent this conflict from spiraling into something even more dangerous. Every decision made in the coming days will be shaped by what happened in these 48 hours. Tonight, we've heard from military sources who are now monitoring ongoing operations across the contested sector. They say defensive forces continue to maintain pressure on attacking units. They say the attacking offensive has lost momentum and is now focused on consolidating limited gains rather than advancing. And they say the attacking command's decision to commit reserves so early is likely part of a broader strategy intended to force a political response rather than achieve a military breakthrough. But the defenders are not accommodating that strategy. In fact, the defenders are exploiting it. Their response today, coordinated, decisive, and sustained, sent a message to the attacking force that gambles will be met with consequences. And it sent a message to allied nations that their support is producing results. As the coming days unfold, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly the attacking force hoped to achieve. But what we do know is that the defensive response was timely. It prevented a potential breakthrough. It demonstrated sustained capability, and it restored confidence among allies who had worried about defensive exhaustion. What happens next will depend on what the attacking force does in the next 72 hours. If they withdraw and regroup, this moment will be remembered as a failed gamble that cost them dearly. If they escalate further, the defenders have already shown they are prepared to respond in kind. They have shown they are ready to fight. And tonight, for the first time in months, the attacking force appears to be uncertain. Their forward positions are quiet, too quiet. And when an aggressive military is quiet after a failed gamble, it means they are recalculating. It means they are choosing their next move carefully. Because tonight, the attacking force learned something they should have already known. Surprise is temporary. Momentum is fragile. And underestimating your enemy's resolve is the most dangerous mistake in warfare. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is clear. The gamble did not produce the shock the attackers expected. The 48 hours proved more costly for the attacker than the defender. And both armies now understand the stakes have risen once again. And we will be here, watching every detail as the next phase unfolds.